everybody? Sorry, the music stopped for you guys, but I still heard it in my ear.
Good morning.
Awesome. Andrew's joining in here. We got Samuel. If you guys can turn on your cameras, that would be awesome, especially for our special guest today, Catherine O'Neill. How are you doing this morning, Catherine?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, Kurt, and hello to everybody.
And this is being, yes, recording is on. So Catherine's going to talk to us about being a good borrower of private funds. So Catherine, I will let you take it away. I believe you also have the ability to share screen.
Okay. I'm going to do that right now. And
I will continue to let some people come in that are on their way.
All right, can you see my screen, Kurt?
Yes, I can.
Very good. Welcome everybody. My name is Catherine O'Neill. Just a little bit about me. If you don't know me, I own 3 investment properties. I thought I would own more. And then I joined some mentorship where I learned about private lending. I did not know that was even possible as a person. I thought only banks or I don't know, maybe very rich people could do that. And that made a huge difference for me to be able to lend out my money and my company's money. And you can see I'm sort of here in Florida right now. That is the purpose for my lending, is to provide cash flow for my travel. I was a 30-year employee at Procter & Gamble, chemical engineer, and never thought I would go out on my own, but got packaged off, in my early 50s, and thought I would consult. But then it turned out that I learned about real estate and investments, and I'm like, I'm going to do that. So with that, because I actually don't remember how many deals I've done so far, but I've worked with a number of different borrowers, and I wanted to share my experience in terms of what makes for a good relationship and what doesn't make for a good relationship. So as the borrower, you need to be honest. Be upfront with any financial challenges that you've had, any bad history, because your lender will find out. So if you've got bad credit, if you've had a bankruptcy or some sort of consumer plan, credit card debt, not paid property taxes or not paid your personal taxes, all of this will be revealed in the underwriting process. And it's much better if you take control of the narrative. Otherwise, you seem a little sneaky, and you don't want to seem sneaky. Also disclose to somebody if you have a name that is common. I've lent some money to Daniel LeBlanc, in case anyone knows him from New Brunswick. Apparently, many people in New Brunswick are named Daniel LeBlanc, and many of them have really bad credit histories or owe money. And so my lawyer several times was like, oh my gosh, the guy you're planning to lend to, defaulted on this, did that thing. And when I talked to Dan, he was like, no, I know all about these guys, but not me. So just a word to the wise, if you're in that situation, again, it looks like be proactive, and it looks like you're in control if you tell people, oh, by the way, you're going to find these things. They're not me. Don't have your lawyer panic. And then lastly, disclose issues about the property. I have a loan that I'm looking at right now, and the borrower looks so perfect, you would wonder, why is she not borrowing from a bank? But one of the first things she told me is the property has several bylaw infractions. And if you've ever done that, you know that banks and other financial institutions don't like to lend money when there are bylaw infractions. They don't want to have to deal with it. And that's why you go to private lending. So having disclosed that up front, it answered the question, why isn't she going to the bank? So those are the types of things. Be honest, be upfront, be prepared. Your personal data, your company data, the property data, all that stuff, you're going to be asked about. And so if you can have the package prepared, send it on a timely basis, have everything that they're asking for, then again, you look like you're in control. You look like you're confident that you know what you're doing. Also, they're going to ask about the property, things like pictures and video, your renovation budget, you know, your holding costs, etc. If you don't know what type of documentation that you need, ask a lender. You can ask me, and I can send you what I ask for, and that way then you can be prepared, but be prepared. And don't make your lender chase you for data. The more I have to chase you, and this will be a theme, the more I have to chase you, the less interested I am in lending to you or lending to you again. And then finally, like, be confident and be communicative. So asking back and forth, but you know, if you're worried, then I'm worried, and you don't want me to be worried. So be confident. Pay early or pay on time. Again, if I have to chase you for funds, this does not leave a good taste in my mouth. I had a woman that I borrowed to. She was like just a wonderful woman, owned so many properties, but could not pay on time for her life. It wasn't that she didn't have the funds. I would text her or email her, and she would say, oh yeah, right. And then she would send me the money. Don't make your lender work for it, because honestly, I won't lend to her again. As a lender, as a borrower, I know that you're worried. You're always wondering, will the project work out? Is it taking too long? You know, will it sell for what it's supposed to sell, or will I be able to refinance it, especially in this market? But your lender also is worried. They're also saying, will I get paid? Will I get paid on time? And most of the time, your lender has borrowed that money as well. And so they have obligations. So do not make me remind you that you are supposed to be paying me. If I have it in my calendar saying when you are owing me the money, you should have it in your calendar. Really important to know your plans and your exits, like plural S for exits. So again, knowing your plans, having the data available, but what your lender is looking for is information about the property. How much did you pay for it? What is the deposit? If you happen to have a first mortgage or a second mortgage, being upfront with that, they're going to need to take a look at that paperwork. The renovation costs, having that in some detail. Why? Because as a lender, if you don't do what you need to do, I'm going to have to take over the property. So I want to know what is within my sphere of control in terms of what I'm able to do this. For example, for me, I don't lend on apartment buildings. I have renovated a 5-plex and other, you know, single family home type things. So call it a, you know, small multi or less. And so I'm confident that I could take that over if things go bad, but I'm not confident that I could take over an apartment building. Now, lenders are different. Maybe other people wouldn't care about that, but that's a thing for me. So I need to look at what it is that you are, what is your scope of the renovations? So I'll know, is this within my wheelhouse to be able to deal with? Also, possibly, maybe some people only want to be involved in lipstick flips, small renovations, the kitchen, the bathroom, the floor, painting. But if your renovation is extensive, like mine was on the 5-plex, maybe some people don't want to be involved with that. And so again, letting your lender know upfront that this is the scope will have a faster dialogue, allowing them to know if they would even consider loaning to you, and would allow you to know quickly if this is potentially a lender for you. And then finally, the holding costs. Often forgotten, but the utilities and the property tax and the insurance. And then if this is a flip, the cost of the realtor at the end. Again, if I see that you have included all of that, for the time that you're renovating, for the time that you're selling, and for the time perhaps until you're waiting until it closes for a month or 2 or 3. Again, this gives me confidence that you know what you're doing. And again, if I'm confident, I am likely to lend to you. If I am not confident, I may just pass. And it might not be that it's a bad deal. It just might be that you haven't presented it well. And then finally, on the exits, really important to have multiple exits. Especially we've seen it in this marketplace where the marketplace was doing something and then it did something else. Thinking through, what if the marketplace is appreciating? What would I do? What if the marketplace is depreciating or has stalled? What would I do? Because you want to get your money out, but your lender also wants to get their money out as well. And so demonstrating to the lender, taking them proactively through what your exits are. I plan to hotel this because every room is a different color. And if I paint it all white, I might be able to sell it very quickly. But if that doesn't work out, then I intend to flip, meaning that I'm going to have to renovate a couple of bathrooms, the kitchen, whatever else. If that doesn't work out, then I can buy and hold because I have already been able to, I'm pre-cleared for a mortgage, or my company is hearing that I have a good relationship with a banker, that type of thing, or a finance agency. And then if I do hold, again, knowing that your refinance will be successful because you're going to short-term rent it or mid-term rent it or long-term rent it. And especially these days with short-term rentals, as municipalities are cracking down, if that is your only holding strategy, you need another one, either a mid-term rental or a long-term rental. And again, if you're thinking, well, why as a lender do I even care? I care for 2 reasons. I want my money out of the deal, but I don't want to lend to, zillions of people all over the place, and you don't want to borrow from zillions of people. You would like a relationship that is able to continue beyond this so that it gets easier and easier, the lending and the borrowing. And so I want you to be successful with your plans, which is why I care. And again, tell me about them. Don't make me ask. This is part of being confident and upfront and communicative. Tell me about your experience in this area. So if you flipped before or hoteled before, or you're a tradesperson and you know how to frame, share your experience, because that way, then again, I feel more confident in things. I know that you've done this before and might be prepared to stretch a little bit versus if it's your first time. Again, as I said, your success, done this before. And if you haven't been successful in previous experiences, then tell me about the learnings. I learned X and Y, and so I will not do it again. I will do something different. That's super valuable because nobody's perfect and your lenders aren't perfect because we're always learning. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. Information about your team. I have this many people, or I've worked with this contractor in the past, or I have this banker. So, like your power team, my lawyer is really good. Again, the more I know about why you'd be successful, the better I feel about things. And if you're a newbie and you're starting out and you don't have any experience, if you're in mentorship with somebody, you can dine off of their credibility. I'm in mentorship with so-and-so. I've bought into this course. I've done these things. Again, maybe I'm in the same mentorship. Maybe I know of this mentor. All of this makes me confident that you're going to be able to do what you say. I'm going to show you an example of a credibility asset from the Lewis brothers, who have Tritium property renovation. So they have a large team. I think they've got about 10 full-time people, and they've been doing this for 15 years. So you may not have this type of pamphlet that they've got, just take a look at it. You know, they've got their picture on it. They look personable. They've got some examples of what they've done. They happen to be written up in a Canadian magazine, which will not be the case for most of us. So they've used that as an example. But whatever credibility assets you have, again, maybe you've got a list of your deals, or you have a website that makes me feel better. You've got testimonials, that type of thing. Again, this just helps me feel more confident in you as a borrower. It is risky borrowing, as you know. It's also risky lending. So, super obvious statement to say, read the contract, but I would say read the contract, because sometimes they're easy, they're 1 or 2 pages. Sometimes they're way more extensive. Mine currently is 7, probably on its way to 8 or 9 pages. Why? Because I have run into issues that I don't want to have to run into again. The woman I talked about who was not paying on time, it took my time, my effort, and my stress to be able to email her and get the money back. Not to mention that maybe somehow a day or 2 might have made a difference to me. So I now have a penalty clause in. Oh, I'm not supposed to use the word penalty. Administrative clause in there. And that then helps defer my costs associated with having to follow up, or somebody I might choose. But also it's a disincentive for the borrower, or alternatively an incentive for the borrower to pay on time. I know of an example of a guy who, had given a loan to a woman, and things started to go bad with her, and she stopped responding to him. And he had a clause in his lending agreement that said every time he tried to make contact, sent an email trying to get a response, text, letter, phone call, any of those things, because again, he's paying somebody to be able to do that, then there was a penalty fee. She went silent for like 4 months as she was working things out. And then the consequence of that was, she did come to pay off the interest. She did end up paying off the loan, and she had $10,000 in additional fees because of what was written in the contract. It's hard enough to be able to make money. Nobody needs to be able to hurt themselves further by incurring unnecessary fees. So reading the contract is even more important if you're running into difficulty, so that you can know what is in that contract, such that I'm either going to have to pay because I can't pay interest on time, and that's going to be some sort of administrative fee, but if I don't communicate with them, then there'll be more administrative fees. I better communicate with them. So it is a really big deal to keep in communication with your lender if things are going bad. Probably the biggest thing, because everybody is working together, and I've heard from a number of people who have had issues and defaulted over this past year, that as long as you stay in communication, there is an opportunity for negotiation and maybe some leniency. But if you don't communicate, again, people are worried, and that doesn't happen. One thing I will say, because I talked about in the intro, what do you do? What do you not do? What do you never do? So I only have one so far, because this has happened to me. Never let your insurance on the property lapse. Because if you let your property insurance lapse, your lender is now not protected. If I have a first and second mortgage, it's because I want collateral on the property to be able to protect my investment. Maybe this is money from my company that it can't afford to lose. Maybe this is my home equity line of credit, and I don't want to lose my house. But if you allow the insurance to lapse and the property burns down, then my first or second or third position mortgage is basically useless. And although the insurer is supposed to let all the mortgagors know that mortgagee know if insurance is coming up for renewal. Clearly, that did not happen in a way that it was supposed to. And I know a guy where he let the insurance lapse for like 4 months. If you want to move your lender into high gear to get into power of sale, that's what you do. You do something really egregious, and then the lender will move really fast. So you don't want that. That's a list of don't do that. If nothing else, keep your insurance going, because then your lender is at least protected in some way. Okay. So in summary, we work together. You might think that your lenders are in control. Lenders probably feel like the borrowers are in control, but we really are in a partnership, because without lenders, there are no borrowers. Without borrowers, there are no lenders. The lenders help fuel your success, but in turn, you help fuel my cash flow. And so we really do work together, and we're partners. And so being good partners, being respectful of one another, communicating, and always trying to do the best and being upfront and honest about stuff, that really is the way to go. And it's a small community, as you know. I'm sure there are absolutely awful lenders out there. And so if there are, it'll be talked about. So better to be a good lender than a really bad lender. And then similarly, it's a small community, and so borrowers are talked about. And as I told you, I've got a couple who I would not work with again for sometimes some small reasons, sometimes some big reasons. And if anyone ever asked me, I would be upfront with it and tell them. I'm not, because there's privacy, I understand that, but you want to make sure that you keep your reputation and your company and yourself in the very best position to be able to fuel your future success. And you do that by being a good borrower. And so with that, that is my end, Kurt. That is sort of all what I had planned to talk about, but I'm happy to answer any questions or whatever I can do.
All right, let's open it up for questions from people.
And it's so good to see people. Good to see you, Robert, and so many other people that I know. So just good to see you on a Saturday morning.
Catherine, I'm not sure if I missed it, but do you ever add a quick claim to your contract?
I haven't so far. Currently, it just says power of sale. Probably because I do not want to take over the property. I don't need more headaches. So it is something that I would consider. So in the case with the man who was running into tremendous difficulty, and I thought I would have to power of sale, but I didn't. I did consider quit claim. For people who don't know, quit claim is where you take over the property for some agreement. It's like it's a private sale in effect. So I think an example that, because I talked with Shelley Hagan about this because I was not familiar with it, and actually Robert, I think you might have talked to me as well. And so, the idea of, I don't know, if you owe me $100,000, but you have a property worth $120,000, you might say, hey, I will just, I'll quit claim this to you. And yeah, I've lost 20,000, but I now don't have to worry about the property. So sometimes those happen, and that is an option, and power of sale is an option, and foreclosure is an option. Even in Ontario, which is a power of sale province, one of the few of them, you can still foreclose. But we should talk about better things, nicer things. Those are sad things. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, if I were, you should be asking Catherine for money.
I do have a question for the group. Has anybody ever borrowed privately? Bob, you have? What was your experience like?
It was flawless. And it wasn't Catherine. I'm sorry, Catherine, but it was with my mortgage broker, and he just had a connection, and it was meant more as an interim, but it turned out to be more long term. So yeah, it was flawless. And Catherine's absolutely right. Like, I have a calendar reminder. I actually taught the lender how to set up auto deposits. So when I make payments, it actually they were very nice though. They're just up north. So yeah, to this day it's flawless. I think the renewal's coming, so we're just talking about how to increase the payment to put more on principal as opposed to mostly interest. But I guess the thing we can't get away from is just the rate, right? Like, I mean, that's just normal, but this is one of the things I've talked to Kurt and Robert about, is always trying to calculate a rate that still gives me cash flow on the property. But yeah, but for me, it's been flawless. Yeah.
For me, I prefer to do short-term loans. It reduces my my risk, and so things like hotels or flips or refinances, because I do charge a higher amount of interest, but then again, it's short-term. You know, it's a cost of doing the project. I don't ever want anybody that I'm working with to be paying 15% or 20% or whatever on and on. Like, to me, that's a failure. And so I don't tend to get involved with the longer term things, because I think my sweet spot is shorter term. But yeah, there's a place for both. And I'd heard a flipper couple, like, up until a couple of years ago, I really thought anyone who borrowed private money was a loser. I mean, why wouldn't you go to the bank, right? Because that's all I knew at that point, that I borrowed from the bank. Why wouldn't you go to the bank? And I heard a flipper couple up in Barrie talk about their financial model, how they have, you know, money coming in for their flips. They don't know when it's coming in, and so they can't guarantee that they're going to have funds to be able to buy the next deal. So when they get money, they just lend it out at 10 or 12 or 15%. And when they need money, they just borrow it at 10 or 12 or 15%. And it's just a choice they've made, because the banks don't have the flexibility, don't have the relationship anymore that maybe they used to have. And they just like that consistent T4 income cash flow. Like, probably all of us, when we bought our first houses, and we were just like textbook boring borrowers. That's what the bank likes. And so they're great for who they're meant to serve. And then private lenders are great for who they are meant to serve. And that is, you know, people like us who are taking a little bit more risk, a little bit more short term, and want the flexibility that if you have to extend, as you said, then you're like, hey, I'd like to extend. I found the same thing. No renovation ends on time on the budget that you thought. Everything takes longer, everything goes over budget. So just being aware of that. And when people come to me and they're like, I need my money out in, I don't know, 6 months, I'm like, don't private lend, because you have no guarantee. And you don't want to be the guy who's like, no, I need it out and I'm causing you difficulty. Like, that would be bad lender etiquette. So, you know, be a good lender.
Thank you, Catherine. That helps. I'm sorry, Kurt, I got to sneak out, but I promise now I have it in my calendar for 10 to 11.
Perfect. All right.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Catherine.
weekend,
I'm glad I got the first part. Thanks.
Yeah, I have
All
a
right.
question.
Fire away.
Yeah, hi, Catherine.
Hello.
Yeah, so let's say, can you go over some scenarios? Let's say the worst thing happens for both the borrower and lender, and then the borrower, for whatever reason, gets into trouble. He was doing a flip, let's say, in this market environment, either is able to make payments but cannot refi on time, or might even be unable to make payments for a while. Can you just go over possible, like, the conversation that would be you would have, and possible options?
So it depends if your borrower is in first position or second position. And let me write that down so I don't get lost in my thoughts. So a first position borrower is in the best position, and you can probably have the most flexible conversation because they're in first position. And so if you're not paying interest, for example, then having the conversation of saying, I'm not able to pay on time this month, but like if there's an option, I can pay in a week, I can pay in 2 weeks or something, then I'm going to say most people probably would say, okay, not ideal, but fine. And would work with you, asking the question, will you be able to pay next month and the month after? And if you won't be able to do that, what are your plans? What are your exits? And I've seen lenders and borrowers like basically brainstorm together, and borrowers do things like extending the loan, possibly dropping the interest rate. So you can have that conversation because it's not a bank. Banks are like, no, just give me, in my experience, just give me the money. But if it goes on too long, again, at some point, there's going to be like, some point of no return, and they're going to need their money out. And also during this time, they're becoming more and more worried. And so there probably would be the idea of saying, okay, you're going to have to sell at some point. Like you're going to have to sell in this market where maybe you're making less than you hoped, or you're going to have to work on refinancing, even though that hadn't been your exit strategy. So you may have to have an exit that is less than ideal. If you're in second position, it's way riskier, as I discovered. And in second position, the first position mortgagee has no obligation to be able to get any of your money out of the deal. And so often, rarely, would you as the borrower, not be able to pay the second, but you can pay the first. First is usually higher, right? It is 70% loan to value or 60% loan to value. So it's a bigger chunk of change. So you probably can't pay either. If that is the case, as a second mortgagee, I have to move faster, because if the first mortgagee decides to sell, and I'll just give you a real life example. I was in a deal where there was a first mortgage for about $450,000, and then I was the second mortgagee for $100,000. So the guy bought the house for about $550,000. Even though the legislation says that if you have to power of sale, you try and get the very best rate possible. That's why you use a realtor, because they're professional, etc. And I thought, well, this place that had an appraisal on it for $600,000, surely you'll be able to sell it for $550,000, which is the $450,000 for the first mortgage and the $100,000 for me. I talked to a mortgage broker and she's like, oh, no, the first mortgagee, if they start to move on this because they're not getting their interest paid and they have investors, all they need is their $450,000. And I'm like, but that's not what the property is worth. And they will say, well, it doesn't matter because they just want their money out fast. So because of that, as a second mortgagee, you have to take control. And so I have to move faster. So it's a bit of a tougher conversation. I can't give you as much time. And I'm going to have to start outlaying money. So in my case, because this happened, I had to pay the insurance to make sure the property was insured to protect my investment. That was $5,000 out of my own little pocket. I hadn't appreciated how quickly we needed to resolve things. And so by the time, like after about 2 or 3 months that we hadn't been paid interest, I realized I had to take control as a second mortgagee. I had to pay $10,000 in the interest payments for the first mortgagee. If you think about the first mortgage, if they're getting their money, why would they do anything? I'm getting my interest rate. Even though it's from someone else, I'm happy. So what that did for us is, as the second mortgagee, we were now the ones in default. And so we were the ones talking with the lender. And again, you remember the market, right? It was going down quickly. People were shocked. People were not coming to terms with things. And we had to have the conversation saying, you need to sell. I know you planned on selling at this, and then you thought you might have to sell here. And and I know you've got investors who are unsecured. Thank God I'm unsecured. And so you may, you're going to have to sell here. And I'm sorry, but you're going to have to. Otherwise, we're going to force your hand. But what we did is we'd been having the conversations. He'd been talking with us. And then on top of that, we also gave him like a week. It's like, you need to think about what you're going to do. Either you're going to sell at a price that you can sell at, and you're going to have to deal with the other stuff you can't pay off, or we're going to force your hand. And that has a whole bunch of, other people can maybe speak to it more, but that has a whole bunch of bad ramifications. It goes on your credit report. Lawyers are involved. It costs more. So you have some time, but you don't have a whole lot of time if things are not going the way you anticipated. But again, he was in communication, so we could have that conversation, including that hardest one that said, you need to decide, Guy, because your time is up.
Yeah, for sure. That's tough if you're in the second position and let's say the property now is 480 or something, or 500,000, right? And then
this is, will be really problematic. So that's why your lenders ask for the data that they do. And it's a pain in the butt. I agree, right? I need the comparables today. I need the comparables after repair. I need your renovation budget and your holding costs and your this, because I need to see it for myself, because I've had an example where the guy's like, here's my renovation budget, and the fence is like this. And I'm like, don't you think if you're selling the property, the fence should be upright? And he's like, oh yeah, I guess. And I'm like, that's not it. That's not a guess. And sure enough, he had to fix the fence, but he didn't have it in his cost. So this type of underwriting protects me, because again, if I had to power of sale, then I would have to go in and do those types of things, or accept a lesser amount of money. So that's why we ask for the data we do and need as much as we do, because we have to make sure that under multiple exits, can you sell it for what you intended? Can you sell it for, if you were in Ontario, $100,000 less? Can you refinance it and at the price that you might get for it at 80% refinancing or 70%? What is that amount of money? I need to make sure that the first mortgagee gets paid out. If I'm the second mortgagee gets paid out. If I'm the third, worse yet, the third mortgagee, I will get paid out as the third mortgagee. So you have to do a bunch of analysis to be able to feel confident, as we did. As long as we were power of selling, then we would get our money out.
No, that's thank you for that. It's good to hear from, there are a lot of things you wouldn't think of ahead of time because it sounds simple on the face of it, but then you kind of look deeper with somebody with your experience, and then you see all these issues you wouldn't even ever think of, like with the insurance, or you were making payments for the first position mortgage just to kind of keep it alive and just keep it going and just to see what happens.
Exactly, until you live through it. And that's why it's good that we come to understand one another. So you'd be like, okay, I understand why the lenders are doing what they're doing. And then similarly, I mean, it's a little easier to understand the borrower side of things, but only if you communicate do we understand what's going on. I'm looking at giving a loan to a guy who's got a really poor credit rating, and many lenders would not do that, but I'm looking at it, and I'm listening to his story and what he's trying to do, and there's a whole lot of character involved to say, like, on paper it's a bad risk, but in person, like, I think we could have a relationship. I think I could help. So some lenders maybe are into helping, but not such that they sacrifice themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Catherine, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Do you have any other stipulations on who you don't lend to? So I know you mentioned you don't lend to people in condominiums, but are there other stipulations that you wouldn't lend to? Like, for instance, if someone came to you and said, "Hey, I'd like to do a home renovation to my own personal residence, and I want to finish my basement, or I want to put in a pool, or whatever that case may be." Are there any other stipulations that you would not lend on in those scenarios? Like, yeah, if you can explain.
Yeah. So again, I'm into the short-term exit. So what I would need to understand is, how are you going to get my money back out to me? Can you refinance? Because you've got T4 income and you've got immaculate credit, and the bank is going to give it to you. Or maybe, I don't know, your HELOC is busy right now. You've lent it out to somebody, and so that's why you can't use your own home equity line of credit, but then you're going to pay me out when you get paid out in your home equity line of credit. Those types of things might be okay. Now, I would say to you, if you were in Ontario or BC sitting on an appreciated property, I'd be like, hun, first off, you private lend for a period of time, you make the money, and then you renovate for free. So sequencing, if you have equity, makes such a huge difference, because like down here in Florida, it's for free. Yes, I am paying for, the place, but I made the money in advance, which is a little bit of old-fashioned thinking, right? It's delayed gratification. And usually you hear, in real estate circles, leverage yourself to the hilt. But I'll tell you, I'm so grateful that I was not leveraged to the hilt, because my mortgage rate on my fiveplex has doubled. And so I am no longer cash flowing. But thank goodness I have little nest eggs here and there so that I am not underwater. I feel so sorry for people who are. But I couldn't sleep at night if I didn't have some sort of rainy day fund, just in case fund. And always, it means you're not maximizing every dollar you've got. But again, as I said, I can sleep through it. So going back to, so I would say Ontario or British Columbia, only because the properties have appreciated so much. So you've got what you paid off for your house, bought your house for $500 or $1 million. I've, possibly paid it off, but now it's worth 2 million or 3 million or some crazy amount. Sequence that so that at the end you pay for the renovation, you're like, I owe nothing because I already made the money. But yeah, I would need an exit strategy. I would ask you to do that. Go and see how you can refinance your house. Go make sure you're comfortable with those payments, because I want to make sure I get my money back, and I don't want you to be paying 15% or whatever it happens to be forever and ever. Like that's craziness. And then there are people who are charging 20 or 25 or 30. Frankly, even more crazy. And then I heard about a one, talking to a guy, and he's got a loan from, I can't think of the company's name. It's at 40%. Like, don't do that. So anyway, I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you very much.
Has anyone had any experiences either with lenders that they want to share, so I can add to my list of like, this is a bad thing, or alternatively, as we heard earlier, like, good experiences with lenders, or tips for anybody?
I think it's very important to understand to be self-aware about your risk tolerance, right? You've made a choice to lend short-term on higher risk types of deals like flips, and sometimes it works out great and sometimes it doesn't. But there are other ways that are a little less risky. You're not going to make as much money. If you're giving the first mortgage on your RSP, for example, you're not going to get the 15 to 20%. You're looking at more 10 to 12%. Promissory notes, you're going to pay a higher rate. if you have security on the property, you're going to pay you're going to get a lower rate. So understand your risk tolerance if you're going to get into private lending as well.
Absolutely. And Sam, you had asked my criteria. So short term, ideally no longer than 6 months, but I've broken that a couple of times. I'm now moving into secured. I did some unsecured before, and I'm seeing that people are not paying those off. And that, again, that worries me, because I know I'm getting paid back. I'm getting paid back handsomely, but that's not, in my mind, this is supposed to be a two-way street, and they're supposed to have been able to get out from paying, in that case, like 20%. So I'm moving into the more secured, as Robert had talked about, because I want to be able to sleep at night. And then and ideally it's like a lipstick flip if people are doing that. So I don't want to have to take over. Every time you open up a wall, it's a whole new can of worms, and I don't want to have to get involved with that. I like second position mortgages, because I was talking with a mortgage agent, and he's like, here's the thing about second position. It's like a diversification portfolio, because if a first position was 500,000, you could have 5 $100,000 second position mortgages. And like, not all are going to go bad, right? You might run into problems, but not all of them. So you make a higher rate of interest, but you've diversified your risk over this portfolio. And I'm like, well, that sounds really cool. I never thought about that. I will not do third position mortgages. It's too much risk for me. And also, often you cannot get insurance. So if the place burns down, on a third position mortgage. So that's a game changer. That's a game changer for me. And also just recognizing that nothing comes on time. So I think there's been like one guy with a non-secured, with a promissory note, and he paid me off early. It was like only a guy ever. Otherwise, it's barely on time and usually late. And I'm hearing their problems about, supply chain. The windows cost more, this cost more, right? And I'm like, I hear you.
Adding to what Catherine has been saying about the short-term lending, when I lend on a flip, I typically do a 1-year mortgage, but it's open after 3 months or 6 months. So we'll do the first 3 or 6 months as closed with a lender's fee plus interest. But then the person doing the flip has got the flexibility to go up to a year if they have issues with completing the flip or getting their financing or selling the place. So it just provides flexibility to the flipper, and it solidifies the agreement.
Sam.
I've heard a story from a friend of mine who was borrowing from a lender, and a day or two before closing, the lender ended up pulling out because they no longer had the funds secured. And it put a friend of mine in some pretty difficult positions, having to look for another lender and had to do, navigate some unfamiliar water. So the question is, should we have more than one lender kind of that we're working with? Like you mentioned, definitely having a relationship with one lender, so that way you understand how each other work. However, should that be broadened out to have maybe 2, maybe 3 that could lend in those different positions should something like that happen? Because I guess some of the lenders, if you're lending out your own money, that's one thing. But then I understand with some lenders, they may be lending out on other people's money as well. So they may not have access to the funds, or something happens in another deal and they can't take the money from one deal and bring it to the other. So is it advisable to be working with more than one and structure things differently that way, or put your eggs into one basket?
I think so. I think they always tell you, or at least I remember the bank telling me for my kids, like, have 2 credit cards at 2 different banks, not the same bank, so that you begin to have a relationship with more than one bank. And I would say the same thing. Like, what did they say? Dig the well before you're thirsty. So having that relationship with a couple, because you're right, it may not be somebody's cup of tea, so you need another alternative, or somebody may just not have the funds right now and you need the funds. Yeah, I've heard the same sort of awful stories about people pulling out at the last moment, and like, that's awful and should not happen, but it does. But I think then also, yeah, having multiple, so you could call someone and say, like, we've worked together in the past, you know, I'm a good guy, and holy jumping, I need money now without maybe the normal due diligence we would do. If I've worked with you in the past, I'll be like, okay, like, that's what I aspire to. Someone call and say, I need 500,000. I don't have, you know, I'll send you what I've got, but oh my God, I'm desperate. And to have a relationship where people would say, I have your back, I'll be sending it to you, but you know, but yeah, I do need the paperwork, right? That would be so empowering for both the lender and the borrower to have had that sort of relationship. I'm also seeing the same thing. I'm really surprised. A number of lenders are coming to me saying that their lenders are needing their funds. And so they're looking at having to find another lender to take over from the first lender. So it's like, so I guess I'm thinking that other people's properties are underwater and they're like, I need my money back. But, you know, so it's like just a chain of difficulty on the lender side as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Thank you very much.
There's a question in chat from Lucas. Do you have any advice for talking to lenders about finding or funding deals without any experience?
Again, I would say you need some sort of credibility assets. So I've watched 20 hours of YouTube on how you do this flip, or, you know, I'm a tradesperson. I'm working with somebody who's done this. So if your contractor is experienced, if your lawyer is experienced, you know, again, sort of dining off the credibility of others. I'm in mentorship with so-and-so, or something like that. Because I have my hard-earned money, and I don't lend on like first-time people. It's just too risky. Why? Because I was a first-time renovator. I was not flipping the property. I was just renovating my own property, and I was awful. I mean, it was great end result, but boy, did it take a really long time. And again, we were doing an extensive renovation. So every time a wall opened up, it was like, oh, this is so exciting. And there was the opportunity, rather than putting down patio stones, why don't we pour concrete? Oh, that's a much better long-term suggestion. And so, yeah, I think you're going to need to, you need some sort of credibility assets. The other thing that you can expect is to give up equity. There is, I don't know who would be willing to give you a mortgage at the beginning. Usually they'd say, okay, Lucas, I'll partner with you, but I need, 50% as your money partner, or 70% as your money partner. So when you start out, my observation is you have to give up equity to be able to get your deals done. As you get better and better, you can give less and less equity until the point whereby you keep all the equity in what you are doing, and somebody will give you a mortgage because of your experience. Kurt, Robert, other Robert, like, do you have any points along those lines? I think that, to me, I see that people start off joint venturing. Maybe you think it's like that's what you're supposed to do, but then after a while they're like, I don't want to have to joint venture anymore. I don't want to have to negotiate with this person, and I now have enough experience that I don't have to. I can do it my way. Are you seeing the same thing?
I wouldn't say so specifically. I think it depends on if you find people that you get along with, you have the same goals, and why not joint venture, even if you have developed your own experience.
Cool.
I've actually started, done some major work in the last 2.5 years on my portfolio, refinancing some, selling some, and pivoting into managed portfolios. I'm getting involved more on the investment side of managed portfolios of properties, of self-storage, buying into short-term rental resorts, where I'm an investor lender into the project as opposed to being the one who's doing the work. I've got to the same point as you, where the private lending is much more interesting, and investing at the portfolio level much more interesting than busting my butt.
Okay, we have a few minutes left, just trying to look at those that are on camera to see if there's any inquisitive faces with questions.
I was going to ask this question, but Robert just kind of answered it a little bit. I was just curious, after 3 or 5 properties, whatever you had done, flips, whatever, and you transitioned into the private lending, looking back, the amount of work, effort, risk, stress sort of thing, is it much less with the private lending versus dealing with the individual properties? And how about as far as profitability, the comparison?
I'd like to take that, Robert. So I was a model was shared with me that I think is really cool, that talked about sort of the approach that real estate investors might take. That often you start off with very little funding. And so some of those active strategies, wholesaling, hoteling, flipping, are required at the beginning, and they're fast. You get a big chunk of change, and but they're very active. And then often people make enough money over time that they move into sort of these mid strategies: buy and hold, Airbnb, rent to own. And that these require more money because you need a down payment, because you get, you don't get very much cash flow every month. The play is longer, right? I'm going to sell in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And yes, Sam, I do. And so that's sort of the mid thing. And then at some point, they start to cash out from those because your tenants have been paying off your rent. You've got you've been doing some cash flow. Maybe there's some appreciation, and then people move into the sort of the private lending, which requires the largest amount of capital. It has a smaller rate of return because you don't have, like, the flip where you might again make 20, 30, 40, 50,000 all at once. The buy and hold where again, after 20 or 30 years, I might make, if you're in Ontario, you could have doubled what you put into it, but it's consistent monthly cash flow. And you can almost do the math a little bit. Like I remember one guy saying that he wanted to be able to make $10 million because if he had $10 million in capital, he could lend it out at 10%. And then that would make him $1 million a year. So like the math can be easy, but again, he would need to accumulate $10 million to be able to get $1 million. So you can do that. And I would say it's stressful, as I've talked about, but I don't know, you underwrite a deal in 6 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours. And then from that, especially, it's the same amount of effort for a small deal as a big deal, as we all know with real estate. And so if you're either on the bigger deals or if you're okay with stuff, it's a relatively small amount of effort. And also if you have a mortgage broker, it's even less amount of effort. But you may also make a little bit less because, various fees here and there. So that active strategy to passive strategy to private lending, that was a model that was shown to me. And so if you think about like where you are in life, where they were trying to explain to me, you already have assets, Catherine. You can bypass the active. You know, you've got a couple of passive. You should move into private lending right now. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm not going to do wholesaling because I don't need to. But like Lucas here probably needs to do wholesaling because it's a way of getting a bunch of cash. You know, if you're young, and I'm assuming that Lucas doesn't have assets, and that is a bad assumption. But like if you were young with no assets, you need a way of making money.
All right, we're right at 11. So I don't see any more questions coming in. So I think we will wrap it up. So Catherine, again, thank you very much for being on this morning and sharing your experience with everybody. I think a lot of value for those that are here and those that are going to watch the recording of this. And yeah, and look forward to seeing more of you in the community, in the chat. I'm sure there'll probably be some questions.
Well, it's been my privilege to be able to speak with you this morning, and I hope I provided some value. I just appreciate this community and what Robert and Kurt and others are trying to do. It's just really great. So thank you very much.